So comments on quarterstaff. Now, one thing I only hinted at a bit in the last video on spear was that you don't have this fixed, spot to hold the stick. There's not this, well, your hand has to go here, it has to go there, and everything you do better be locked into that because that's totally alive and responsive. No, it's your position on the staff is constantly changing. You're constantly sliding up and down into different positions depending on what leverage you want to gain and why and what kind of distance you want to achieve. And the reason is, for strategy. But I find that something like rattan here, this is rattan with skin on it. You want to keep the skin because it helps prevent breakage and it still retains that flexibility. It's good stuff. And it's nice and smooth. You can move your hands down it all you need to. And sometimes you do, shifting positions. You might be in this rowing type orientation to do some strikes, and then you want to pull your hand, extend out, throw it back here, do a reverse strike like this from the hip. So you're always constantly moving. And with a spear, it's the same way. Now the spear, you have a point, and your sharp point is where all your movements are focused. So you're a little more babying that. So there's not so much changing around, but still all the little movements, like anytime you don't have to thrust by doing this. You could leave this hand forward, and slide through. You'll see that quite a bit. You'll have a sliding there. Sometimes you want to change here, and most of Fiore's stuff, the hands are splitting, the difference between thirds. And, he's got positions from longsword, like, this boar's tooth kind of thing, or I think he's even got a crossed over position, kind of like this. I forget if that's the Donna or whatever. A lot of it's oriented towards alternating between the head and the butt. In Fiore, very similar use of what he calls the axe, Azza, and then the spear, the lanza. The point though is, I didn't really mention that in the last video, but there's not like you better put your hand here and you better put it there. This one guy on YouTube is like, yeah, you should have your hand halfway down the shaft at the halfway point, and he's like, well, I can't really comfortably do that, and so that means my shaft is too long. And I'm like, what? If it was that important, I guess you could, work it back here. But why would it be so important to be at the center point? There's all kinds of different leverages and distances you want to achieve, and you'll have to change the positioning in order to do it. Why be so locked into one spot? It's limiting, and it's approaching a sort of, the Chinese would say it's death. It's stiff and dead. You want lively and flexible. If you police yourself to always keep your hands in the same positions, you also run into certain actions will be unnatural for your joints, and you don't want to mess up your joints. So I would say if you're starting out, go ahead and start somewhere on the stick. Find your body's natural parallel position, kind of like what we would do with longsword. Pat would have you, grip your longsword, and he'll come and he'll push your grip to make sure you got your structure. You'll start with that, but keep it the natural width of your arms, because there should be the ability to do all this sort of thing, and not any unnatural feeling in it, and you move from here, practice, moving into different positions and changing constantly, and you can start. You change hand over and under, you can do that. One Fiore teacher was like, yeah, change your hand position by moving this one up and that one back. Doesn't really matter how you do it, just do it quickly and don't lose your grip. But it's not a bad one. But you want to find the natural orientation of your body. Like if I was to be teaching like the old man goes fishing, the first position that you would do, normally you would kick this up and then turn this over and you're here, and then it's like the paddle goes in the water and you're rowing, You know, this position is whatever your natural shoulder width and arms forward. You know, there's no prescribed, you must put it here, you must put it there, and don't put it anywhere else, darn it. You know, but you experiment with the extent of your arms. It's kind of a sweaty day, so these different positions have different purposes, and they're constantly moving up and down the haft of the spear or the quarterstaff. And just thought I'd throw that out there because I forgot to mention it last time. Really, all I talked about was you know, cheating your hand up and out, and you know, changing positions, something like that, which is totally a thing. You know, I do a lot of this kind of striking. Now this hasn't got much to do with historical quarterstaff, like say from Meyer. I honestly haven't dug into it much yet, but you'll find that these principles work as long as you're holding a stick and it's not too rough. It's not wrapped in rubber tape that you can't move your grip. That's a horrible idea. Just a terrible idea. I want to keep things alive and keep them flexible and always be moving. If you're engaging somebody with quarterstaff, I mean, you can start out being relatively static, but as they come in, you need to be taking steps, making little adjustments, making strikes, and you got to get a feel for how long are your strikes, where will they stop depending on your hand positioning. So, you know, you want to strike a pell, strike targets, and do it from different steps. And there's not really a great end to the structures you can make. As long as you're staying in balance and rotating your core, you know, everything is coming from your core. And, you know, your stance will broaden or narrow depending on what you're doing with your feet. So, you know, you can pivot on the heels. Pivoting on the heels changes your stance orientation. Sometimes it's the difference between getting hit and not. It's slightly more evasive to do it on the balls of the feet. But now alternating between those increases and decreases stance height. So as you're moving, you want to be conscious of how far apart are your feet, what's their orientation to each other, and the pivoting you do, be conscious of how it raises and lowers you.